You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hey folks, it's that time again, the time that strikes fear into you every time you turn on your television and see a political ad. That's right, it's election season, if you did not know officially. After Labor Day marks that time when candidates start going door to door or Facebook to Facebook these days, putting up ads and putting out yard signs and cluttering all sorts of things in our mailboxes. So congratulations, America. Here we are again. And that's not to say it's not important to stay engaged and involved, as much as we joke about election season, as much as we complain about the ads that we are constantly bombarded with, especially in swing states, obviously. But so today's episode really is about, we're going to cover a few things that's happening in Washington, D.C. that impacts you. We'll cover a few things around the midterms, what's coming up, what to look for from an insider viewpoint. And then we have a new platform that you can use for your employees and your friends and your family to help them register to vote, to help them know where their poll is, to know what candidates there are in their area, and the dates and times to vote under shoevoter.com, shoevoter.info. So as we get into that, the Shoe In Show, we always talk about being insiders, and here we are, kind of political insiders. Matt Priest and Thomas Crockett, our head of government relations, is on this episode today. So let's tee it off really quickly, Thomas, with what's happening in DC right now that people need to be aware of.
Well, there's a lot happening. I think the biggest thing that's recently happened is the potential railroad strike that was looming, and there was a lot of concern with that. A lot of freight still comes across the U.S. using freight rail, and you had these negotiations which were winding down the 11th hour. Congress was getting ready to get involved. We were urging congressional action if the parties couldn't reach an agreement. And then you had this deal that was reached early morning hours on the 15th of September, and the crisis was averted. So this was a big thing for our industry. This is a big thing for a lot of industries. We're heading into another potential supply chain crisis that didn't happen, and so I think everybody was focused on that recently in DC. That's one key area of concern, and we were. There was a lot of engagement. We were ready to go. We had advocacy letters that were ready on this. We were readying a lot of congressional advocacy on this, but a deal was reached, and so that was certainly good news that happened from DC.
Yeah, I think it was good news. It's interesting because the Biden administration's we had the Horse Whisperer, that movie back in the day that I actually never saw, and I think I'm proud of that. Maybe it's amazing, but Biden's like the labor whisperer, right? And because he is seen as like the labor union's president and spends a lot of time cultivating his base in that way, we see it on the trade front, like zero progress or zero initiative on trade. And I think the labor unions love that. So when you have one of these mix-ups, you start to wonder, and the White House is in the middle of the negotiations and basically arbitrating the negotiations. You start to wonder, all right, which way is it going to come? Is it going to fall in labor's favor or on the side of business? And I have to give the president of the White House credit. They were able to avert that crisis at a time would have been catastrophic. They were canceling long, even just personal passenger rail. They were canceling these long routes. They made announcements yesterday about, hey, we're canceling the route from DC to Miami, and out of Lorton, Virginia, the auto train that runs to Disney World, we're canceling that, and we're canceling the route out to Chicago. So all these, it was going to impact people personally. And I think the White House saw you can't have that happening going into a midterm. What was interesting congressionally was that you had Republican senators in particular wanting to take action to force the two sides to continue on and force there not to be a walkout or a lockout or whatever, or a work stoppage on the movement of goods and the use of rail. And you had Bernie Sanders really actually basically gave a speech on the Senate floor saying now's the time to side with the workers for once. And then Senator Byrd of North Carolina saying, you know how many people are going to lose their jobs, Bernie, if you get your way? I mean, it was personal. And so, which is kind of rare on the Senate floor. You see more of that in the House. So this was really stoked up. A lot of people were concerned. And I have to say, you know, for once, my goodness, we have some good news. I mean, I'm super grateful finally.
I think there was a lot of confusion over kind of how the process was working out. We don't see this a lot. It's been 30 years since we had the last national railroad strike. And so the parties were doing contract negotiations. They were, the sticking point was over sick time for workers. So, you know, sensitive issue, labor was, it was all of the parties, I think, but two particular unions had come to an agreement. So there were two last unions. They were arguing or fighting over this one issue, and it got down to the wire. It was really the 11th hour. It was until Friday is when there was going to be a strike potentially. They were prepared to strike. There was going to be a shutdown. As you mentioned, passenger rails impacted too. Not in the Northeast corridor, not the Washington up to Boston route, but in a lot of parts of the country. And then there you saw the rail already with certain products, you know, hazardous chemicals already taking those off of freight to prepare for this. So really it's a question of timing. This is one of the rare areas with labor where Congress can get involved. It has authority to come in and intervene and stop a strike from happening in rail. And the way that works is the president created an emergency board back in July, which had recommendations in place. And Congress would come in if an agreement's not reached and say, you have to accept these recommendations. The presidential board, you know, came up with this. This is what the parties are going to do. And so really it was a matter of when to do that. You know, we were urging congressional action in the event that an agreement was not reached. You pointed to senators saying the crisis was now. We're seeing the impact. Stop the negotiations. Go ahead and impose the recommendations. And so it's really a question of when Congress needs to act. Had this actually happened, had they failed to reach an agreement, then there would have been a strike, there would have been a shutdown, and Congress would have had to come in. And I think you would have seen some really difficult political dynamics, because you would have to have had Democrats leading the House and Senate and a Democrat president come in against labor, against the workers, and say, we're just going to impose these on you in order to prevent this economic disaster, this supply chain crisis that would worsen inflation. So it's I think having the parties solve it on their own is really a good outcome, probably the best possible outcome, than putting that on Congress to figure it out.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think Andy's just happy that Pony Boy from the Outsiders continue to ride around on the rails.
Hey, I'm just wondering, looking forward, how the robots are going to negotiate their contracts with the humans. That's my biggest concern looking forward.
With force.
I mean, the port issue, the rail issue. We have huge trucking issues. I know, you know, and one particular thing that people really need to know is, like, if the rails had stopped, the trucking would have to take on, you know, the burden of moving product. Mm-hmm. And the Trucker Association, which has a great space right down from Cannon House office building, used to throw great events over there at trucking. Mm-hmm. But they said they would need an additional 460,000 truckers to move what moves on rail every single day. Think about that. 500,000 more truck drivers and trucks, which we don't have, to move what rail moves. So it shows how important it is, but it also shows how vulnerable our supply chain is. I would love, and I think most people out there are saying, I'm really glad that they averted this, but why do we keep lurching from crisis to crisis? Like, at what point are we going to sit down and have a leader that sits there and says, you know what, we need to really rethink and revise our supply chains in America? And I know we saw Congress put money forward towards, lot of green projects, a lot of infrastructure projects recently, which I think will be great. But still, like, we have these, I mean, just look at the blackouts. We have energy crisis, infrastructure. We have port challenges. Our ports aren't big enough. The boats are getting bigger. We have limited space. We're not thinking critically and strategically. So I think that's my concern, is that, and the positive to that is, like, the free market is finding solutions. You have autonomous vehicles delivering food now in college towns. You have autonomous trucks that are starting to be used on interstates, innovative ways of making sure there's safety, where there may be a drop-off point right off the highway and an actual person goes and picks it up and drives it through neighborhoods to the warehouse. So there's things that are being done, but it's all coming from the private sector, and the government continues. Maybe we shouldn't expect too much from it. Thomas, as we look forward, it's mid-September right now. Pretty soon Congress will go out of session. Do we expect them to do anything before they adjourn to go out to their districts and their states to run for office? Is there anything else on the docket in Congress we need to be aware of for right now? I know there might be something like after, during lame duck, but anything coming up?
I don't think we're going to see a lot done before the midterms. There are some things that are going to happen after the midterms. I think you bring a good point about the supply chain issue. There's some serious issues, and I don't know that Congress can fix the problem, but I think that, you pointed to the trucking issue. There's a driver shortage right now. There's a truck driver shortage, and I think something like 30% of goods move across the U.S. by rail, and so putting that on trucks was not an option. And then you had the White House coming in and saying, it was a little concerning to say, White House press, we're looking at air freight, and we're looking at trucking, and we're looking at shipping, and seeing who can step in to fix the problem. And it's like, well, there's not an easy solution on this. And I think we're set in. This is an area that, Congress has obviously passed the transportation bill. This is an area that we have to address, that the government needs to look at closely, as how you address the supply chain issues, because you do have, the port labor negotiations are going on. You have the rail negotiations going on. And really the parties have maximum leverage when you think about it, because we can't afford a strike. We can't afford another supply chain crisis. And the issue of inflation, there's just so much going out there. We're not that long from the midterms. And so I think, it's really getting past that. And then it'll be interesting to see what happens in Congress, whether, traditionally the president's party does not do well in the midterms. Even if the president is doing well, it's tough for him. This is going to be particularly difficult. I do think the rail situation does give President Biden a slight boost, potentially, because a crisis was averted. But there's a lot of other issues, inflation in particular.
I think that's like a national boost, right? Like, that's an overall feeling. It's he's not running, so you say, okay, well, he's the leader of the Democratic Party, so it will help. Yeah, it'll help, but ultimately, when the person walks into the voting box or fills out their form, they're looking at two candidates, or maybe three. There's Libertarian. Blake, our producer, is Libertarian, so he would behoove me to say that. But there's a couple of candidates on there, and you're choosing. Joe Biden's not on the ticket. Donald Trump's not on the ticket, even though they loom large around these different issues. And I think that if you just look at the districts and the way they're drawn, I think it's pretty obvious the House will be retaken by the Republicans, even with the challenges. I mean, that one recently in the past week, you have Lindsey Graham introducing a near total abortion ban on the same day that the White House was doing the Inflation Reduction Act, even as we saw CPI come up and still be a huge number. And a lot of people were upset because they were like, the Republicans continue to fumble the football. So instead of focusing on the economic issues and inflation and going to a gas station and doing, press conferences, they're focusing on, social issues instead. They're just they keep fumbling with candidates and with this stuff. So it is really interesting. It shows the importance of an actual leader of a party, to direct the party in the right way and make sure they're singing from the same hymnal. And the Republicans don't have that.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason that the Democrats will avert catastrophe is that things turned a little bit better over the summer for the Democrats. I mean, I think of the numbers, right? So it's like, for me, it's like the House will probably flip, but how much? Will it be like 4 people? Will it be 18 people? Like, those numbers matter. We all worked in Congress. Those numbers matter because the caucuses are so weird now that you don't have people who like each other in the caucus. You have people who legitimately hate each other. And it used to be, fighting across the aisle or fighting the House to the Senate. And now it's like you're sitting in the same room as a Republican or as a Democrat, and you look across and you're like, I don't like that person at all. Like, and if they want to vote for it that way, I might just vote against it just to spite them. Like, so the numbers of the switch really,
they totally do. I mean, if you look at historically, just over the last midterm elections, over the last few presidencies, 94, which is kind of the Republican Revolution, people don't realize the House was controlled by Democrats for 40 years straight. And we are just now in an era where the pendulum swings back and forth much more frequently. But in 94, the Dems lost 52 seats in the House. Fast forward to Obama in 2010, he lost 63 in kind of the aftermath of Obamacare. 63 seats is unbelievable. And then Trump in 18 lost 40. So I think you're right. The numbers are interesting. I think the House will definitely flip, but what will that number be? And I think the economic issues will still be really important and will still be the main driving force about which lever people pull, inflation in particular. The party that they threw at the White House was so tone deaf on the Inflation Reduction Act the day the CPI numbers came out. I think it's going to be a big number. I don't think it'll be 63 or 52, but I could see it being in that 30, 45 range. I think the challenge on the Senate side is that those are statewide elections. And so one nut job candidate that is recruited and wins the primary, it ruins it. Right. So I think the dynamic will be really interesting next year. And as of now, even Schumer said, as of today, telling his party that the Republicans are going to control that, they're going to take the House, even though Speaker Pelosi is saying the opposite. So I think the writing is on the wall, and the narrative post Labor Day, and this is why we're talking about this, post Labor Day, the narrative starts to kind of take hold, and the people start paying attention, and the data starts to come in, the polling data comes in, and the mold starts to get set. And the mold is setting right now, and I don't think we'll be shocked if we wake up on Wednesday after the election and the House has been retaken and the Senate probably holds, and it's super, super tight as always.
It's super tight right now, too. It's 50-50 Senate. It's the closest it's been in maybe modern history. I mean, at least since the 60s. I mean, it's incredibly close in both the House and Senate with the numbers. And so you don't have big margins if you're the Democrats and you have control. I think, as far as the president, he's not on the ballot, but there are a lot of people, it is kind of a repudiation of his policies to come in and vote against the president's party. And so I think, what we see is looking at the numbers, when presidents are below 50% approval rating, they lose on average 36 seats. And so Biden has some of the lowest numbers, at least, as of right now, of any president. And so I think that is hanging over as we head into a midterm for his party. I do think what's interesting, though, is the Senate. You do have some candidates, who are making statements and who are running close races in states that should go Republican. And so the Senate may not flip. It may stay, it very likely, could stay Democrat. So you could end up with a Republican House, Democrat Senate. And that'll be interesting to seeing what that looks like for policy and for the president going forward.
Well, I think in our politics, we continue to be frustrated by a lack of vision and a lack of cohesive messaging on both sides. Like, I think having the Inflation Reduction Act signing and party at the same day that CPI came out and showed that inflation was still super high. I just don't think President Biden's communication staff does him a lot of favors. I think they could do a lot better. On the Republican side, you have a real problem with Kevin McCarthy being kind of the spokesperson for the House because he flip-flops all the time on how his messaging is. Mitch McConnell is a great master of the Senate, but is not a great spokesperson or to send someone out. He's so technical and he's so he doesn't share a lot. So you just have these it's interesting. Like from my background, I mean, obviously I've done policy work on the Hill, but also I did years of communication work. Just looking at the messaging is so weird. And then your point on the candidates, it's like these are Senate candidates. Like these should be House candidates. Like got no problem with House candidates being a little bit weird and oddball because it's representative of our republic and the changes and shifts across the country in different communities. But Senate candidates, this is where, Clay and all these amazing speeches. And we think about the deliberative philosophies of our republic happening in the Senate. And these are the candidates coming up there who I don't know. They don't reflect to me a political, they're not top tier. I don't think they really have a political philosophy to stand upon, which concerns me when you're in the Senate. So, I mean, I have issues around that, but it's just a weird election time. My fear looking forward is this environment where you have people in your own caucus that you don't like. You start looking back at history where we had it. You start talking about the caning of Sumner on the House floor where somebody came with a cane and literally hit a man, put him in the hospital. It's not beyond us, unfortunately, at this point. So, my God, let's have some leaders in the House and Senate that, can pull people together and get some things done and calm people down a little bit. We don't need our politics to be WWE or F or whatever the wrestling is.
Dude, that's what it totally is, man. Everything's so freaking performative. Will someone go into it's probably somewhere where you live, Andy, into one of the big warehouses of servers that house all the data that's moving and unplug the Twitter one and unplug the TikTok one and unplug. And if you unplug the social media apparatus, I think things will calm down and all this performative nonsense and people get serious again about policymaking. But until you do that, it's going to continue to be
less tweeting and more thinking about things.
Exactly.
But it's we
just don't unplug the shoevoter.info website.
At that point, we deserve the government we vote for.
Yep.
So obviously, if you don't live in Pennsylvania and you can't cast a vote, you care about that. That's just not how it works. But in your local area, every piece of the government matters, from your local county commissioner, your school board, all the way up to the federal elections with House and Senate candidates. And so as good corporate citizens and as just good general citizens, we have to vote. So to make that easier, again, we've introduced this dynamic platform. We're calling it the FDRA Shoe Voter Center 2022. It's nonpartisan. We don't encourage either party. We don't tell you who to vote for. It's simply educational. It'll tell you if number one, what you need to do is check the voter rolls to make sure you're on there. A lot of people think that they're registered to vote. They show up the day of, and they're not, and they have to cast a provisional ballot, and then that ballot then has to be processed to see if for some reason the rolls were wrong and you were on there or not. If it wasn't, then your vote gets kicked out. So number one, make sure you're registered. You can check it through the system, your local elections. If you're not registered through the system, you can determine when absentee ballot request deadlines are. So if you feel like you can't make it to the polling location on election day, you can apply for an absentee ballot. Those are secure. I vote absentee. I voted absentee for 20 some odd years because I lived in DC and I had to vote in North Carolina. So those are secure. You can do it that way. There's a whole process. But the whole center, I think, is important because there's a process to elections. It's not just showing up on a day and voting. We have to make sure we're registered. We have to make sure we know what precinct we are. We have to, I think it behooves us to be a little educated too. I don't always know every county commissioner that may be running. So a couple of days before, I'll go and look. I'll just review some websites and I'll look at some policy proposals and I try to educate myself in the best way possible. But And I'll let Matt and Thomas tee in too a little bit about about this, but it's shoe. Let me make sure I get this right. Shoevoter.info. Shoevoter.info. You can vote with your shoes in 2022.
I think it really does echo the point of getting engaged and staying involved. And I think, as you said, this is nonpartisan. We're not taking any positions on this. We're just helping people find the information. You want to know who you're voting for, how to do that, and this is a great resource. And I think to the point on the Twitter, people are really plugged in and they're following these issues. And it happened with the Trump presidency, where you just saw such incredibly high turnout in that, and then in the last election. And so people are engaged like never before. And it's important for us to continue to stay engaged on our issues and on issues that are important to you. And knowing that everyone else, the others are certainly going to get out to vote. We have to be sure that we get out to vote too. So it's a really key time. It's going to be an interesting midterm. And we'll keep you updated on it. We'll keep talking about it on it. We have a weekly call for FDRA members every Tuesday at 2 Eastern. We cover the latest issues. We'll cover this as well. So looking forward to a lot of interesting discussion between now and the midterms and then after, as we hope to get some policy items over the finish line.
Yeah. And I should say every January we do a congressional and government preview for our members. So we look at what happened over lame duck, and then come January when the new Congress gets sworn in and right ahead of the State of the Union speech, we'll look and see what issues are percolating and what might be passed, and educate our members so they can better align and understand what to expect from a policy perspective for a new Congress and how to entwine. So with that, there was a lot to this, but that's kind of an insider take from FDRA, having to live this every single day of our professional lives. And appreciate you listening. And please do use the center. Please tell your friend. Anyone can use this: friends, family, church members, civic friends at civic organizations, at your school, whatever it is. You can pass this around. It's a great tool and resource for folks all in one place to learn the process and to get out the vote. So with that, on behalf of Matt and Thomas, we appreciate you guys listening. As always, shoeandshow.com is the website. Until next time, register to vote. Mark your calendars to vote. Go vote. We're out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.